Just before Christmas, did anybody watch? Did you see that series that was on called The Bible? Yeah. Bit juicy, wasn't it? Bit bloodthirsty. I saw some of that, and they're just in the process of making a full-length feature called Jesus, Son of God. I think it's going to be released in March. So keep your eyes open for that. Because it's a long way from Peter Powell and Jesus of Nazareth, if you're a bit older and you saw Zaffarelli's version of things. Now it's a lot more juicy. And we have lots more computer graphics, don't we, in the way that things are portrayed. And I found myself watching the Bible on the telly thinking, is that really what happened? Or has it had the Hollywood treatment to make it more watchable? Because we all love a good story, don't we? I do. I love a good story. I love things like Lord of the Rings, where you've got lots of extra bits and the whole Star Wars thing, all 6 of them. And so my lads love watching those things as well. The reading from today, from Isaiah 42, is the first of what is called in the Bible the servant songs. And what happens is, in the story, a bit like in a soap, this is the bit where suddenly a new character gets brought in. Imagine in EastEnders, it's one of them dum, 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 moments when suddenly, I'd love to see how Bev signed that. Dum, dum, dum. It's one of them moments when everything changes. Suddenly, a new character is brought into the story. But Isaiah doesn't tell us who the servant is. It's very easy for us, of course, with New Testament eyes, to say, oh, well, we know exactly who he's talking about. But of course, they didn't. What they heard was what Isaiah wrote, that God's servant was going to rescue them. Let me just give you the wider picture, because it's really important of what was going on at the time. I've totally forgotten what pictures I've got in here, so they might be completely random. I'll try and remember. God had delivered his people, if you remember, from bondage in Egypt. He'd made a covenant with them. He'd led them through the wilderness to the land of Canaan. They'd become a mighty nation. They'd built the temple, and for centuries they'd had military victories. They'd expanded and became a real force to be reckoned with. And then they strayed, didn't they, from God's covenant. And we read the story of God raising up the prophets, telling them, come back, come back. And then in the 6th century, something like that happened. The unthinkable. Utter destruction at the hand of the Babylonians. Everything they knew was destroyed. The temple went, all the buildings, their livelihoods. The people were marched off to Babylon in chains. And of course we've got that bit of scripture made famous by Boney M. As they sat down by the rivers of Babylon, where we sat down and wept and remembered Zion, as they remembered home and all that had been taken from them. So that's where we are in the story. We really cannot understand what that is like. Maybe the closest thing for us is maybe what has happened in Stoke to our pottery industry, where we've seen probably just about every family in some way. Livelihoods completely changed. Future for young people, where there used to be lots of jobs. That's maybe the only thing that we could compare it to. But it was nothing like that. It was way worse. Because their whole, not just their physical life, their social life, but the temple had been destroyed. Their whole identity as God's people had been taken away. And I wonder if they were in that place where they were just asking the big question: where is God? We are God's people. How can we find ourselves in this situation? Miles from home, everything destroyed, even our very identity is now in question. Had God left them for good? I wonder if you've ever been in that situation. You could be there right now. I wonder if you've ever been in that place when inside you're just crying out to God, what are you doing? It doesn't make sense. Everything seems to be going pear-shaped. God, where are you? What are you doing? Well, be encouraged today, because this wasn't the end of the story for Israel. Thank God. And it's not the end of the story for you. And it's not the end of the story for me. Dum, 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 dum. To be continued. God writes to be continued over our lives, even when we feel like God is nowhere around. So into this situation that they find themselves, through Isaiah, God speaks. A ray of hope. A fresh light bulb at the end of the tunnel gets turned on. Someone will save the day. This person called the servant. I wonder if you've ever played that quiz. You know, where you see a close-up of something and you've got to guess what it is, and then obviously you then see from a distance, so it'll be the bristles on your toothbrush, but taken really, really close up. Just nod if you know what I mean. It makes me feel better. Excellent. Well, what Isaiah does, he kind of says, stop looking so close and take a step back to look at the picture. One of my granddad's famous sayings was always, "Oh, I can't see the wood for the trees." It's the same idea. Sometimes when something is so in our face, when the situation is overwhelming us, we just can't see because it's there right in front. And through Isaiah come these words. It's like God says through Isaiah, zoom out, get a bigger picture. One commentator writes, by reminding Israel of who God is, how God works, and what God is doing by sending a servant, Isaiah expands the frame of reference, relocating Israel into God's cosmic frame. In other words, they can see the wood for the trees. He says, stand back. Look at God. Look at the whole of creation, and then look at your situation from that perspective. And maybe you'll see it a bit better. God's not just the God of Israel or Babylon, says Isaiah. He created the heavens, verse 5. He stretched out the heavens. This is the God of the whole of creation. He made everything that is and was and will be. He dwells in this enormous cosmic space. He's not cramped up in the everyday minutiae of our lives and the circumstances that we get trapped into. He's the God of every living creature on the planet. And finally, this is the God who reached out to create this particular people, Israel, but also the whole universe, says Isaiah, and you and me. So what Isaiah does, he gives them a sneak peek, a bit like at the end of the soap when it says, and coming up next week. This is what Isaiah does. He says, this is what's coming up next, to be continued. Firstly, he says, I'm going to send my servant. But what kind of servant does he send? He sends a spirit-filled servant. My servant I will fill with my spirit, he says. This servant is not going to be a tyrant or a conqueror. It's not going to be a military solution to get them out of the situation that they're in. A bruised reed he will not break. This servant is going to be a person of mercy, a person of God's grace. This agent of God is going to bring justice, not domination. Secondly, God's answer is not just for Israel. It's always way bigger. It's for all people. He works, as Isaiah, to bring justice in all the earth to all people. God sends his servant to persevere until justice is done all the way to the coastlands, verse 4 says. Sometimes when we're locked into the pressures of where I am in my situation, God says, step back, look up, think bigger. There's a bigger story that you are part of. Yes, it's about you, but it's not just about you, ever, is it? We are always blessed to be a blessing. Always. Think bigger, says Isaiah. And finally, to be continued. God's call on them is to be a light to the nations, to open the eyes that are blind, to bring out the prisoners from the dungeon, from the prison, those who sit in darkness, verses 6 and 7 say. God calls them to righteousness, not just for themselves alone, but for the nations. God's not abandoned them. There is a purpose in God's process. And that's true for you too. Let me say that again. There is a purpose in God's process. If it seems really tough and it doesn't make sense, believe there is a purpose in God's process. God is building his character and his purpose. So hold on and look up to God. Interestingly, what this is not is a story of revenge, is it? God's people taken away, all their good things taken away, their identity taken away. Something that in us wants revenge. God, can't you just smite them? Can't you just send some thunderbolts on the Babylonians? Let them get their comeuppance so that Israel wins the day. God's solution is never like that, is it? God's solution is to restore Israel. So Isaiah says, step back, look up. Why? Because, verse 9, in the space when we step back from the immediate of our circumstances, it's in that space that new things are declared and spring forth, verse 9 says. We can't see those new things when all we can see are the trees. We need to step back to see the wood And it's in that space where new things are declared and spring forth. This is a vision for the future, even in the depths of the situation that they're in. Remember God's promise through Jeremiah. I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Plans to give you what? To give you hope and you have to do louder than that. Hope and a future. There is always hope and a future with God. Come to me, pray to me, I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all of your heart. Today, we remember as the Church of England, Jesus' baptism. The point where we remember Jesus who came as light to who? The world. Not just to Israel. This gospel is for all people. A light to the nations. This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased. If we just flip into our Acts reading just for a second, we find Peter, we heard, in this place called Caesarea Maritima. It's pretty obvious what it is. It's Caesar's town, and it's a port, Maritima. It's Caesar's port, and in Caesar's port was a huge temple on the cliff edge dedicated to Caesar and to the goddess Roma. Never before, up to this point, has Peter been, or of any of Jesus' followers, been in such a Gentile stronghold. So Peter is standing in the most Gentile of Gentile towns that is overlooked by a temple dedicated to Caesar and a foreign god. And he's standing in the home of Cornelius, who was a Roman officer who serves that country. We miss that sometimes. We just read the words. He's in the most Gentile of towns under the authority of somebody who is 1,000,000 miles away from God's promise. And yet, God has sent him there. If you read just before, God has orchestrated the whole plan and sent him to the home of Cornelius. Some 600 years after Isaiah was writing, God's story that was for all people is being worked out in a new chapter. At that point, God's story is breaking out into the Gentiles. All the prophets testify about him, that everyone who believes in him receives forgiveness of sins through his name, says Peter to Cornelius and his house. 600 years later, after the words of Isaiah, and God saying, my story breaks out for all nations. There it is, it's a key moment as the gospel breaks out to the Gentiles. And here we are today. Our part in the same story. God's great redemptive story for the whole of creation. And it's our turn. This is our chapter. With exactly the same commission. To carry the hope, the love, the gospel, the light of Jesus. In our time, in our day, to our community, to our city. That's quite daunting if we take it seriously. But the servant, if you remember, was what kind of servant? The servant was one filled with God's Spirit. Exactly. and filled with God's Spirit, we will do exactly the same things. Because he is the same God. And by the same Spirit, we will continue the story out into the streets of Bentley, around the places where you live, in the schools, in the places where you work and spend your time. This is our turn, our page, our chapter in this great big story of God for all creation. And the good news is, it's to be continued. So whatever situation you find yourself in, can I encourage you to remember, take a step back, look up, and in that space, that's where God declares new things over your life, in and through your life. Amen. Let's just take a moment to pray, shall we?